And welcome everybody, I'm Doug Jardine. I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm glad that you're there with us. There are a few things happening in our communities right now, and throw into that mix, hey, we have primaries coming up on June 30th. We hope you all get involved. Today, we offer you a chance to meet 4 people running for governor on the Republican side in this forum, sponsored by the West Chamber of Commerce, South Jordan Chamber of Commerce, and the Southwest Valley Chamber of Commerce, as the candidates talk about some general issues, but also many specific issues that we want to ask them about as they pertain to the west side of Salt Lake County. West Chamber of Commerce represents the business voice of West Valley City, the city of Taylorsville, city of West Jordan, and Kearns Metro Township. South Jordan is in South Jordan, obviously, and Southwest Valley Chamber of Commerce representing the businesses in Harriman, Bluffdale, and Riverton. There's no debating today. This is a forum-style format for you. The candidates will be here to express their views, their visions, and their goals. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement, followed by 11 minutes of answering questions that we sent to them, and then some questions that they haven't seen that we have for them. We'll give them about a minute to a minute and a half to answer those questions and give you their responses. You'll be able then to compare their answers as we get to know them all much better today. In a random drawing, the order was selected. You will hear first from Spencer Cox, followed by Greg Hughes, Thomas Wright, and then John Huntsman. Following the questions, each will have 1 minute to provide a closing statement. And just as a plug for our chambers, because they do such a fantastic job, they are here to help you in your local communities and small business around this great state of Utah. They help strengthen the business community where you and I live. They represent the interests of businesses with governments. They promote the community, they build business relationships, and they, of course, are involved with political action. They are a catalyst for business growth in your community as well. They are a convener of leaders and influencers, and you're going to see many of them today, and they are a champion for a stronger community. And so with that, it is time to meet our 4 candidates today. And we begin with Utah's current Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox, and a gubernatorial candidate in 2020. Mr. Cox, welcome to our forum today. Okay, I can see you now and we can hear you now, because this virtual stuff is kind of impressive and it blows everybody away and it's daunting at the same time. Welcome, I can see you, you look great. I want to give you an opportunity, Spencer, to open with a 2-minute statement, if you would, please, and welcome.
Well, thank you. It's so good to be with you, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to have this opportunity. It's been a crazy 2020. I hope you are all doing well. I hope that you are safe, and I hope that we will all be able to get through this together. Running for governor is the honor of a lifetime, and I'm so excited for the future of the state of Utah. We are going through one of the most challenging, one of the biggest challenges we've ever had as a state, and that is a health challenge and it is an economic challenge. There are very few silver linings, but I think it is important that we do look at those silver linings. One of those is that Utah is poised to come out of this in a way that will bless the lives of Utahns for generations to come. We have been named by several publications, Forbes magazine, Harvard, the White House have all said that Utah is going to be one of the 10 states that will lead this nation's recovery. We led the nation in Utahvod in the month of April. We have the 5th fewest restrictions of any state in the nation. 45 states have more economic restrictions on them right now. And not just that, but what we are learning through this pandemic, we have seen the supply chains break down across the world. China has been a bad actor for a long time. And as I'm talking with some of my colleagues across the country, we truly believe that Utah is poised to see a renaissance in manufacturing, and that Utah can really be the foundation of that as these jobs are moving back here. So there are some positive signs. We're seeing people come off unemployment at a higher rate than they're joining unemployment right now in the state of Utah. So we're getting our leg back under us, and we're willing to sprint ahead. We have led the nation in private sector job growth over the last 10 years. It's been an honor to serve as your lieutenant governor. We've done it before, and we're going to do it again, and I can't wait to work side by side with you to make that happen.
Almost exactly 2 minutes. Well done to start us off. We're going to stay on schedule because of that.
I just guessed, so I have no idea. I didn't have a clock in front of me.
Well, here we go. Mr. Cox, Utah's business environment has been very good, as you mentioned, for the last 10 years. We are consistently named in best of lists all over the place. One of our technology companies just sold for $8 billion, while many smaller businesses, though, especially minority-owned businesses, struggle to find financing to support their stable growth. What role, then, can the state take to provide these businesses with a better chance to share in Utah's vibrant economy?
So access to capital is really important, and again, is going to be critical coming out of this. And so, I think it's important that we focus on the moment that we find ourselves in right now. And we are in discussions as we speak with the legislature as we are moving towards a special session, probably towards the end of next week. We do have CARES Act funding that has come in here. I had a conversation just yesterday with the governor, and really the focus on that CARES Act funding has to be on small businesses and keeping small businesses open and making sure we have access to capital for those small businesses, and particularly, as you mentioned, minority-owned businesses. And so this was part of the discussion that we were having yesterday. In what ways could we use that CARES Act funding to help make sure that we are keeping the doors open, keeping the lights on, keeping those businesses going? More long term, we've seen a huge change over the past 10 years. We are now fourth in the country for venture capital funding, which, again, if you had told anybody that 10 years ago, they would have thought that that was impossible. And so we have an opportunity to really become the financial hub for the rest of the nation. By the way, a lot of that is already happening, but it has to happen at the small business level, at the mom and pop level, and at the minority business owner level. And so we are having those discussions with our financial institutions. I met just a couple weeks ago with some executives from Zions Bank about what they could do to provide more capital to our minority-owned businesses and our small businesses, and those that are struggling right now. And so, as governor, my job will be to make sure that those discussions continue and that actions happen, and we actually do provide the capital that is necessary to expand those businesses.
Appreciate that. Let's move on to the issue of the day, no question about it. With the challenges of the past couple of weeks or so, both nationally and in Utah, with the reaction to the death of George Floyd, there's a lot of frustration in communities all around our state and around the nation. What's your impression of how the state has responded? You've led that. You've been involved with that directly. And then what are your general feelings, Mr. Cox, about this movement gathering speed to defund police departments?
So this is an important moment in our history, and one that I hope we'll look back on in a positive way. So let me start with the first part of that question. The death of George Floyd was a despicable act, and it's important that we give voice to that frustration, that we allow for people to protest, that we protect those constitutional rights of people to express what they're feeling right now, the anger and the sadness and the fear that is out there. We need to give voice to that, and we need to listen to that voice, and we've been doing that. We had incredible meetings with the Multicultural Commission, which I chair, as well as the Martin Luther King Commission and others who are helping us to better understand what's happening out there. At the same time, I attended a funeral for one of Utah's finest, a police officer who was killed in the line of duty in Ogden just last week. And it was gut-wrenching to see what happened when he was killed protecting the lives of those that he was, he stood up and called to serve. And so we reject the notion that these two discussions are at odds with each other. I believe firmly that we can and are coming together, and these really important discussions are happening right now. They're happening in our police departments, our chiefs of police, our sheriffs, our public safety director, who are having these very conversations and supporting changes that need to be made. And that's a great moment for the state of Utah. Now, there's a difference between protesting and rioting. And there is no place for these agents of chaos who have come in, tried to hijack the peaceful protesters, overturning cars, looting buildings. We will respond strongly, and I'm grateful for the response of law enforcement officers, of our National Guard, who stepped in very quickly to put an end to that, so that we could have these peaceful protests moving forward. But let me also just say, it's a huge mistake, this push to defund police departments. That will not end well. We can do better than that. Now, we do need to increase funding for social services and to help people, and we've been doing that and working on that. There's still so much more that we can do to get upstream, to make sure that especially our young people are able to get a good education, so that they don't become part of that pipeline into the criminal justice system. We know about the social determinants of health and the health disparities that exist between our multicultural communities and the rest of the state. And we're working on a project right now with IHC in Ogden and St. George to get more funding into those areas to increase health outcomes as well. But culture matters. We have to have a moment of humility. We have to look within each of us. It doesn't matter how many policies we change or how many laws we change. If we don't change culture, then there won't be change. There is no place for racism in our society. We have to look within each of us and say, how can I do better? Read a book, reach out to someone, get proximate to someone who is different than you, someone who is different than me. Try to see the world through their eyes instead of just being dismissive. And that's how we're going to see real, positive, sustainable change. And I believe that Utah can lead the nation in showing that there is a better way, that these issues don't have to divide us, that they really can bring us together in positive ways, and that we can show that there is a better way to do this.
I know there's a clock, and I know it's at 000, but if our candidates want to expound on something, that's fine. This is your forum. I don't need to be here to interrupt anybody, so thank you for that answer. With new growth in the valley, especially west of I-15, Mr. Cox, over the course of the next 15 to 20 years or so, what is your vision for improving transportation, including transit roads and west-east commutes? And there's so many facets of that: commercial traffic, inland port, Olympia, all those types of things. What's your vision for that in the west part of this valley?
Well, let me just speak to the broader vision, and this is so important. And I just have to say, oh, I can see the clock now. I couldn't see the clock before. This is awesome. Thank you. The clock is now there. That we can. This is really important. We want to maintain a high quality of life here in the state of Utah. There's a simple formula I've always used, and it's never proven me wrong, and I know some of you have heard it before, but where infrastructure precedes growth, the quality of life stays high. Where growth precedes infrastructure, the quality of life goes down. And that is certainly true on the west side. We have to focus on the east-west corridors, or we will see and have seen a reduction in quality of life. Mass transit is a critical piece of that. I'm a firm believer in mass transit and what we need to do to expand that, to get more people off of the roads and onto tracks, onto front runner, and that's going to be a critical piece moving forward. Also, when we look at these new projects, we have to coordinate between municipalities with the state. I don't think it is the role of the governor. I'm a former mayor, I'm a former county commissioner, I'm a former city councilman. I believe firmly that the best decisions are made at the local level. It's not my job to come in and tell everyone how to grow, but it is my job to help coordinate that growth and to get the resources that are necessary so that quality of life stays high. And so that's what I will be pushing for. I would encourage everyone to go to the Wasatch Choice 2050. You can go in there and see some of the planning that has taken place. It's an incredible project, and it certainly impacts the west side.
Quick question for you here before we get to a closing statement. You don't always agree with President Trump. I guess there's a lot of people that don't. But if he is reelected and you are elected, how does that impact you, the state of Utah, and our relationship with the federal government?
Well, the good news is that you don't have to ask that question. You can just look at what we've been able to do over the past 4 years. We have had a wonderful relationship with the president and vice president, a relationship that will continue under a Cox-Henderson administration. And again, it is so critical that we have a good relationship with our federal partners. We just saw the president tweeted out, although this was something that had been worked on for a while, a huge grant that is going to UTA, that matters. It matters here. It matters on the west side. And so maintaining that positive relationship going forward is going to be critical for me and for whoever the next governor is. And that is true, if President Trump is reelected, or if Senator Biden is elected. We have to maintain a good working relationship with the federal government. At the same time, one of the things that I appreciate most about this Trump administration is that they are restoring power to the states. It's something we've been pushing for a long time. It's kind of nice, I will say, to have our Democrat governors who actually now support it as well. Since Trump is the president, they want to get power back to the state. So this is a real unique opportunity for us to be able to do things that states should have been doing all along under the Constitution, but power that has been usurped by the federal government. And so we are going to continue to lead out, and I can't wait for the opportunity to continue that relationship over the next 4 years.
I would imagine you'd want 5 more minutes, but in your last minute now, in a closing statement, please close and also tell us why you selected Deidre as your running mate.
Well, I could say all kinds of things. Let me talk about Deidre. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you that I have no doubt right now, and I know something about lieutenant governors, that Deidre Henderson is going to be the best lieutenant governor our state has ever seen. She is incredible. She is policy driven. She is brilliant. She gets the details. She's one of those rare legislators that jumps in and truly understands policy and how policy impacts people. She has been an advocate for transparency. She's been an advocate for removing barriers to entry for small businesses. It's one of the reasons I chose her. But the most important reason I chose her is that a couple years ago, when southern Utah County was on fire and we had the largest evacuation in our state's history, I was working there for the governor on that issue, on the fire, and I saw her there every day. She was there early, she was there late, she wasn't looking for the camera, she was rolling up her sleeves, she was handing out food, she was helping people. And that's when I knew if I ever ran for governor, that Deidre needed to be my lieutenant governor, and I'm honored to have chosen her. It's the best decision I've made in this campaign, and we ask that you would consider voting Cox Henderson. We look forward to serving you over the next 4 years.
Fantastic. One more quick question for you that we can fit in. Do you want to fit in anything into a general closing statement now that I asked you about, Deidre? You're more than welcome to do it.
Well, let me just say this. Again, it has been the honor of a lifetime to serve as your lieutenant governor over the past 6.5 years. I have had an opportunity. When we announced this campaign, I said that we're going to visit all 248 cities and towns in this state because we care about the people. And we've been able to get to 215 of those. We're hoping to finish things up over the next couple of weeks. But it has been incredible to listen and learn from you. And this is the thing. Look, we're the best state in the nation in so many of these, the best state for business 6 out of the last 9 years, the best economy in the nation, all of those things. But none of that matters. What matters is that we have the best people. We lead the nation in volunteerism. We lead the nation in charitable giving. That's what makes Utah special. That's what makes us unique. And I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve as your governor.
Would you change anything in the last few years as lieutenant governor?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wish we lived in a world where we got to see everything in hindsight. There's no question that there are things that we could do better or differently. But I think if you take what we've done and you stand it up against any other state in the nation, you will find that Utah exceptionalism is alive and well. And again, I'm not trying to take credit for that. It's the credit of the entrepreneurs in this state. It's the credit of the faith-based leaders who give back and lift others. It's a credit to the private sector that has that cares not just about the bottom line, but cares about people. And so there are things that we can do better, and we're going to do better. We're going to increase funding for education. We have to solve the teacher shortage here in our state. Those are things that we will be working on over the next 4 years.
Lieutenant Governor, we absolutely appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today. We wish you all the best in the primaries upcoming on June 30th.
Yep, your ballots are out now, though, so don't wait. Vote today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on. Thomas Wright was born and raised in Utah, once chairman of the Utah... I'm sorry, what?
Greg Hughes.
Oh, Greg Hughes, that's right. My bad. We're going to go right to Greg Hughes. I put him in the wrong order here. Greg Hughes is a former Speaker of the House in the state of Utah and a longtime state representative. He is successful in real estate and property management as well. It's a pleasure to welcome Greg Hughes into our forum today. How are you, sir? Now I see you. How are you, Greg? We're missing some audio.
Oh, we're muted.
There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Are we good, Bill? Barely. We're good, barely. We're going to up it on, we're going to turn up the volume on our end and make sure folks can hear you and throw you out an opportunity to start here with a 2-minute opening statement.
Okay, hey, thank you for having me on this forum. Greg Hughes, I'm running for governor. It's an open seat. Don't see them very often in the state of Utah. 1992 was the last, if you can believe it, the last open seat we've had. We have 4 candidates in the Republican Party running for the Republican nomination. That's something that's never happened in our state before. And this is why I'm running. I served in our state house for 16 years. I had the opportunity to be Speaker of the House and serve as Speaker of the House for the last 4. You learn a lot about our state. You learn about the challenges. You learn about how to get through those challenges. You learn about some of the attacks and some of the political winds that work against you when you try to get and accomplish good things and important things. That's why I decided to run in January, and that was before we had a virus that has really changed our world in almost surreal ways. And so I think times, we can argue, have gotten tougher. We're seeing an economy that was closed down, struggling to get back on its feet. How the states responded to those things are, in my mind, something worth talking about and important to talk about. I'm not happy with a lot of the things we're seeing right now in terms of our constitutionally protected liberties. Ultimately, I think that this race is going to come down to a battle of ideas. Utahns are smart. They want to hear from the candidates, and that's why I appreciate this forum, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you'd have.
All right, we appreciate that very much. The first couple of questions are going to sound familiar, but that's fantastic. We want to hear opinions on these. Mr. Hughes, Utah's business environment has been very good for the last 10 years. We're consistently in top 10 lists and that type of thing across the nation. One of our technology firms recently sold for $8 billion, but at times, minority-owned businesses don't participate financially in that success. What role can the state take to provide these businesses with a better chance to share in Utah's prosperity?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I've observed, so I served in our state house for 16 years. I'm a recovering legislator now, so I've been out for 2 years. But one of the things that I've seen is what I would describe as administrative creep or even bureaucratic creep. And what that is great people that I've worked with that represent the executive branch. You have, I served as a lawmaker when Governor Levitt was our governor, Governor Walker, Governor Huntsman, and Governor Herbert. A lot of a lot of familiar faces through those different administrations. And I think what ends up happening is if you're the little guy and gal, it's hard to interface sometimes with the state of Utah, its regulatory agencies, its departments, its divisions. In an open seat, this gives us an incredible opportunity to see some new faces. As governor, I would ask some people that have been interfacing with state government and their departments, the regulatory climate, if they would consider a state job that they weren't looking for necessarily, but to be a cabinet member and to help build a department or a division of our state that puts the service back in public service or the servant back in public servant. When you call the state of Utah, you should be finding on the other end of that phone or in a meeting someone that wants to help you get through all of these things. Where you point out that there are some businesses and some people that find barriers to entry. Any person, any color or creed, but especially the little guy and gal. When you interface with the state of Utah and you're not finding a way to help you through the hurdles or the regulations, then we're not doing our job as a state. This state has a lot to be proud of. We've seen our economy grow, but that economic prosperity not only has to be experienced in the Wasatch Front, but statewide, and particularly when you get statewide, we're talking the little guy and gal that need their shot.
And you used the word barriers, so I'll just transition that to the next question that I want to mention here, because it is what's happening across our nation in the last couple of weeks. With the death of George Floyd, frustration in communities, large and small. What's been your impression about how the state of Utah has handled that issue, and then ultimately with this other issue gaining momentum of defunding police departments?
So first off, I think it's terrible that I thought you saw collectively this whole country recoil with the images we saw of Mr. Floyd, his murder. I've never heard from a Republican, Democrat, a liberal, a conservative, any color or creed, anybody that was comfortable with what we saw there. Everybody was upset. Everyone wanted to see justice served. And that was a moment and a brief moment of unity where I felt everybody was on the same page. I think tragically, you see people whose main interests are civil unrest and violence, who took a moment like that, and I would argue with disregard to even the life of Mr. George Floyd, and use that as a vehicle to commit violence, to try and create civil unrest, to divide us as people. I think that this is the land of the free, home of the brave. We are a melting pot. And as long as we allow people to divide us and to separate us through identity politics, we'll never come together. And so I think there's something very different about the protests and the recoil and the collective voice that we are not happy with what we saw. And that is not exclusive to any demographic in our country. Is very different than the violence that we're seeing in the civil unrest, which its purpose is to divide us. And I hear that dialogue going on quite frequently. Let me tell you about defunding the police. I got asked this question for the first time in a town hall on last Friday. It is so out of the scope of or realm of reality for me, I didn't even understand the question. I thought it was, if the police can't protect the public, and if they're going to let lawlessness go on uninterrupted, should the state, or should it, if I'm governor, should we interrupt that and tell the police thanks but no thanks and do it? But that's not what they were saying. They were saying that jurisdictions would want to defund police, our police departments, and walk away from public safety. I think this whole defund the police is such a radical discussion that it's hard for me to take seriously, but I have to, because I think there's some serious people that would like to do it. Public safety is not a socioeconomic status issue. It is not if you live in a great or nice neighborhood, you should be able to walk down your sidewalk and in your neighborhood free of fear. But if you live in other areas, and more urban areas, or areas where, say, people are experiencing homelessness, that there shouldn't be a police presence or public safety be protected. I think public safety, we're all entitled to it, and my suspicion is the first people arguing to defund the police, if things got pretty scary, which I think they would quickly, they would be looking for someone to call to help protect them. And that's kind of why we have the police department. And so I reject any notion that we defund our law enforcement. The men and women that are in law enforcement, we need to appreciate the work they do, and certainly not try to splash the images we saw and the things that happened to Mr. Floyd in some broad brush way across law enforcement of this country. It's a very unfair and inaccurate comparison.
Thank you, sir. Why do you believe it is so beneficial for you to highlight your relationship with President Trump?
Because I appreciate this president. I think he has, and he's endured a lot of criticism along the way, but I know personally what he's done for the United States in a positive way. I also know what he's done for our state specifically. You have a lot of communities, and we talk about little guy and gal, when the federal government continues to encumber federal land, and this is what Clinton did on his way out as president, almost as the Utah being the ATM to his donors and the environmentalist network nationally that supports him, encumbered the Staircase Escalante National Monument, and then Obama doing the same thing in a tweet from Hawaii, the Bears Ears National Monument, with a picture of Arches National Park, which shows you how disconnected this president was from the decision he was making. Go to those communities, those small communities, and ask them if they were abusing this land or harming this land in a way that required further encumberment by the federal government or management by the federal government, because they were risking the beauty or the land itself. That is something that, for the people that grow up in those small areas, small towns, is such an offense. Our president, President Trump, came to Utah and in our state capital for the first time in American history, rescinded and pulled back significantly 2 national monuments that shouldn't have been made in the first place. And he'll never get rewarded nationally from conservative groups for that. He'll get attacked by the more liberal environmentalist groups, but he'll never see an upside nationally for that. He did it for the people of our state. And I've seen that in multiple occasions. He brings and convenes locally elected state lawmakers and county elected officials from different states to come to the White House to meet his cabinet members, give you a phone directory. So if you're a public servant, you can reach out to that administration. It's never been done like that before. I've been able to work on even small issues with the FAA and small little jurisdictions like Airport Number 2 that sits in West Jordan. And I just think we've not been forgotten by this president, and we cannot forget, or we need to know the good things this president has done for our state. And so it's not just in certain audiences where I'm willing to say that. I have led with that because I think that that's a quality of leadership. I want to acknowledge the good things that this president has done for a small state like Utah, but one that he doesn't forget.
You mentioned airplanes, so we'll talk about transportation here for a minute, because there's so much new growth expected in the west part of the valley over the next 10 to 20 years. What's your vision for improving transportation, including the transit roads and west-east commutes? And of course, there's so many things involved in that, from Rio Tinto property and all that south connections to Utah County. What's your vision for that?
So look, when I was in the legislature and I was on the clock, we worked very hard on these things. We have 130 miles of fixed rail. That's commuter rail and light rail. If we don't know what that does to our roads or our congestion, or trying to prevent the congestion of our roads, if we saw those systems shut down, we would see that our road congestion get so much worse. We have one of the highest, what they call choice riderships in America, meaning you own a car and you park it and you use either the commuter rail or light rail or even the bus rapid transit to get around. If we didn't have that, you'd see even more cars. So we've worked very hard on what we call multimodal transportation infrastructure, saying that you can't pick your favorite mode and just fan out in lane miles, 24-lane freeways or things like that. We need to find different ways for people to be able to commute and get around. We also look for and encourage the development, as we're a growing state, particularly in the Wasatch Front, where along those transportation nodes, those limited access freeway on-ramps and off-ramps, along where there is fixed rail and there are stations where people can get to and from, so that you're not congesting the roads even more. But the longer play is this. We have seen, we have 80% of Utah's population that lives in just 4 counties out of 29. It is the case that our congestion failure and traffic congestion failure is getting worse every day. It is the case that there's a scarcity of housing. As we continue to grow in population, there's more demand than there is supply of housing, even after all the best practices we look to implement. We have 29 counties in this state. It is high time that we see the rest of our state see the economic opportunities and growth, so that you can see the populations of young people that grow up in communities not have to migrate to the Wasatch Front, making it even more crowded. And in those areas where we bring and provide economic opportunity through infrastructure, a proper role of government, through better road systems and rail spurs that connect the rail, through water and water infrastructure. You need water to grow. These infrastructure projects will allow the rest of the state, and at least 22 out of 29 states that have never known a day of economic opportunity, you can see those populations sustain themselves finally and even grow. And that will be a relief valve for the Wasatch Front, and this is why we need it. We're told by the University of Utah that Utah's population will double by the year 2050. Do any of us think in a 130-mile valley that makes up these 4 counties that we could fit 80% of 6.5 million people in just 4 counties out of 29? I don't think it's possible. I don't think the quality of life would be high and the cost of living would be low. I think it's the opposite. So if we know that that's coming, and we know from a high birth rate and being a pioneering state where people come to the state of Utah, how do we continue to grow in a sustainable way? That way is to see that infrastructure investment and even the system of inland ports, which we haven't talked about, see that economic opportunity happen throughout the state. It's an issue that aligns perfectly with the people that already live in the Wasatch Front and those that live off the Wasatch Front looking for that investment by our state. The interests of all the people of Utah now align going into 2021, and so that's the play.
A question that I don't know if anybody else is going to ask you this year, but as we look at what's happening in our nation, people talk about families. They talk about having moms and dads or parents or partners, 2 partners in those homes. You were raised by a single mom. How does that make Greg Hughes who he is today?
Thank you for asking. It's kind of a personal issue that I wasn't really willing to bring up in campaigns before, but I have started talking a little more openly about how I grew up in this campaign for governor, because you're absolutely right. It informs who I am. I had a wonderful mom. She was an artist, and she had a different way of looking at life. And so while I had a lot of love in the home, I do know what it's like if you don't pay the bills every 30 days when they come due, that the power can be shut off. I know what it's like to be evicted out of an apartment. I know what it's like to go to different schools every single year. All those challenges. I've never talked about it because I've never said those things to try and evoke any kind of sympathy. I've shared that because it does inform who I am. I think there's adversity in life. I think I'm stronger. And that my empathy for other people and people's circumstances and families as they make their way has grown because of the way I've grown up. And so as a dad, as a husband, as a family man, as a small business owner, making my payroll, trying to make overhead even in difficult times, but even as a public servant, when I served as a public servant, it informed those decisions. I think that's powerful. I think that empathy is one of the greatest tools we have as a leader to make informed and strong decisions.
We have about a minute and a half, and I would ask you to include a closing statement, but also tell us why you selected Victor Iverson as your running mate.
Thank you for asking me. So, we all have opinions. We're entitled to them. I think this is the strongest ticket by far. You have myself, where I've served in our state legislature and the Speaker of the House. I have an understanding of the state, how it operates, how we make decisions, how we overcome the obstacles and address issues. But in Victor Iverson, Commissioner Iverson, he's the County Commissioner of Washington County, which is not in the Wasatch Front. You see that high-growing Washington County, St. George area that's grown so much in spite of the odds against them. He was Senator Mike Lee's Public Lands Director, so he knows the public lands issues, the federal lands issues with our rural communities. And Commissioner Iverson also was elected to be the president of the Utah Association of Counties, so elected by elected county officials from all over the state to really represent the face of county government to the state legislature and to interact for policy purposes. And so Victor Iverson's a leader. He is a strong conservative. He's in his second term as a county commissioner. And when I worked hard to earn his endorsement, he said he was all in. He didn't know what that meant. But I think we make a strong ticket, and the perspectives we bring to this issue is we talk about how do you find prosperity and bring prosperity to a whole state. He has been living those issues of infrastructure in his county and in southern Utah and rural Utah in his different capacities of responsibility. He's been doing this for a long time. So it really does give us a well-rounded ticket in terms of perspective to make sure that the things we're talking about here, albeit hard, we're able to do and make sure we get these hard things done for the people of Utah.
Mr. Greg Hughes, thank you so much for your time today. Hope the expanded format let you explain things a little bit further. We certainly think you did. Thank you.
I loved it. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Okay. I tried to get Thomas Wright on here earlier, but that was my bad. We'll do it right now. Thomas Wright was born and raised in Utah, a former chairman of the Utah Republican Party, and a successful real estate broker. Mr. Wright, welcome to our forum today. How are you, sir? We're going to offer you 2 minutes for an opening statement. There you are. Welcome. Do we have the audio there? Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you great.
Okay, and we can hear you. 2 minutes, sir, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, my name is Thomas Wright. I'm running for governor because I love the state of Utah. This isn't about me. This isn't about my campaign. This is about the people of Utah. We face some serious challenges with the pandemic and economic recovery. We face growth challenges, and we need big thinking at a time like this to make sure that Utah comes out of the pandemic even stronger than it went into it. If we get to 200,000 people in this state back to work, I forged my executive experience during difficult economic times. I built my business in Utah that's now about 250 people in the organization by making hard decisions, by having hard conversations, and the Great Recession refined those skills. Now that we're going to be short on revenue and our local communities are going to be struggling, we need to make sure that we have an executive and a governor that can lead and that has led organizations through difficult times. I'm a proven conservative, I'm a proven executive, and I believe that I'm the right choice for Utah.
You mentioned short on revenue, so I'm going to start with a different question for you, if I might, Thomas. You suggested budget cuts may be needed. Where and why?
Well, we've got to make sure that we first figure out how short we're going to be. Some estimates are that we're going to be about 10% short of the $20 billion budget. That'd be about $2 billion. And then we need to do what I proposed to do even before the pandemic. We need to look at our priorities and ask ourselves the question, is Utah spending its money according to its priorities? And even before the pandemic, I proposed going through the budget line by line and taking a zero-based budgeting approach and making sure that we're efficient and that we're spending money according to our citizens' priorities. And that's where we need to start, because that's what businesses are doing, that's what families are doing. We need to be absolutely certain that every single dollar is accounted for, that there's no fraud, there's no waste, there's no abuse. And that's what new leadership can bring, especially somebody with executive business experience, somebody that has gone through budgets. I have spent the past 12 years looking at balance sheets, profit and loss statements, financial statements. I know how to manage complex organizations. I know how to cut spending. And we just need to make sure that we're looking at every single department and we're asking, where can we be more efficient? Because we've got to search for those dollars now more than ever, with the budget coming in short and our citizens struggling more than ever. We owe it to them to sharpen our pencils and to be as fiscally prudent as we can possibly be. And as governor, I will do that. I will go through the budget line by line, and we will identify savings and figure out how to do more with less.
I think you used the word business at least six or seven times, and this, sponsored by Chambers of Commerce, makes sense to do that. So this question that you've heard before and to the other candidates, Utah's been pretty good for the last several years on a lot of top 10 lists for business and that type of thing. One technology firm sold for $8 billion, but at times minority-owned businesses especially don't seem to get the benefits of a lot that's happening in the state of Utah. What can we do to make sure that Utah is an all-inclusive state for all businesses?
It's a great question, and I thank you for acknowledging the fact that I am a business owner. I think that's a really important differentiation for me from my opponents. My three opponents are professional politicians, and they have a lot of experience in government, but I have an equal amount of experience, and I believe that I'd be the right person to lead this state, especially when it comes to the question that you've asked. I believe we've been offering far too many economic incentives to companies to come to certain areas of our state. I don't want to totally take off the table economic incentives, because that would be pandering. There may be opportunities for us to get high-skilled jobs and other companies to the state of Utah when we might want to use those incentives. But by and large, they need to be reduced. Go-Ed's become too bloated for me. I think it needs reform. I think we need to look at what the original mission is and what we need it to do now. And I would like to take that money, and some years it's $70 million or more, and apply it to lowering the rate for all businesses. If we lower the rate and we broaden the base by applying it for everybody, then you have a fair tax structure where everybody is benefiting equally. And that's what we need to do in the state. I've talked to minority business owners, and they tell me they don't want to be treated differently than any other business owner, but they want to be treated fairly in the landscape of having to compete in Utah. And while Utah's been ranked the best managed state, and we do a lot of things correctly, we can take that money and we can apply it broadly so all businesses can benefit from it. And that's the best way to support small business owners. I know, because I am one, and I've had those thoughts before. Why are all these out-of-state companies getting all these incentives? And I'm the one here carrying the load. So that's what I would like to do as governor.
And I'm a small business owner of a company with one employee, so there's the difference between what's happening in the state. So much has happened in the last couple of weeks in the state of Utah, across the nation, with the death of George Floyd. A lot of frustration spilling into streets everywhere. What is your impression about how the state has responded to this particular incident, and then ultimately the growing movement now, if you call it a movement, to defund police departments?
Well, this is a good moment in American history for us to listen and to learn, and to identify ways that we can improve. That we can improve on racial inequality, we can improve social justice. The murder of George Floyd was just that. It was a murder. It was devastating to watch. And we all need to step up as citizens and say, this is not the country that we would like to live in, that we can improve. And I want my Black friends in Utah to know that I am listening, I am learning, I stand with them, and together we can make change in this country, starting here in Utah. And I offered a very specific example of this in the gubernatorial debate. As governor, I will appoint the public safety commissioner, and I will ask that public safety commissioner, who sits on the post Peace Officer Standards and Trainings Board, to identify a way to add into the curriculum a a way to identify and improve upon training our police officers so that we can be more sensitive to the challenges that this country faces by listening and learning right now to what's happening in the wake of the George Floyd murder. So as governor, that's one specific thing that I can do. I want to do that. And I believe that the police officers want that. There's a lot of people out there that want to be a part of listening and learning and improving. And this is a moment in time for us to do that. And I want to embrace that moment. And I want to show the rest of the country that Utah is not afraid to have the hard conversations. We're not afraid to make difficult things happen, and that we want to lead by example in being part of the solution.
Thank you, sir. You're pushing, and you call them as well, fresh ideas for the state of Utah and your campaign. And even on your website, it says other candidates had a chance. I have a plan. In what specific areas does the state need your fresh ideas?
Well, one, we need a plan for economic recovery. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that's wreaked havoc on our economy. And as a small business owner, I know that specifically. I get up in the morning and run my business simultaneously to running a campaign. So this is not something that I think I know. This is something that I deal with every single day. So we need a very specific economic recovery plan, and I have one on my website. I think some of my opponents have put one out since I did that, but I have been very specific on things that we can do to have an economic recovery. We need to do what we do in the private sector. We need to freeze hiring. We need to freeze capital projects. We need to make sure that we're not wasting any of the money on things that we now don't need. The budget was passed before the pandemic hit, and our needs have changed. So we need to be really careful with every single dollar that we have. And we need a very specific economic recovery plan. We also need an educational recovery plan. There's a lot of anxiety out there. Parents wondering, are my kids going to be going back to school? Am I going to be homeschooling? Am I going to need to quit my job to do that? How am I going to manage all of these things? There's moms and dads out there wondering that right now. So we need to have a very specific education recovery plan. Now, the pandemic is fluid, but we still need to be dealing with these things in real time with very specific, detailed plans. And I put an educational recovery plan out in an op-ed in the Deseret News. So we just need to make sure we're electing leaders that are prepared for these times, that understand how to not only have a vision, but a strategy, and have the executive experience to execute on that strategy to make it happen for Utahns.
A lot of people are talking about expanding housing in the state of Utah, but there seems to be a shortage of what some might term affordable housing. As a real estate executive, what are your thoughts about housing situations in the state of Utah, and specifically potential future impact along the western side of the Salt Lake Valley?
Well, I want to recognize that the western part of the west side of Salt Lake County is much different than the east side. I want to become very connected to the issues, understanding that the growth primarily in Salt Lake County now will happen on the west side, and that the west side is very different than the challenges we see on the east side of the county. I'm passionate about affordable housing, and I want to start by saying that I respect local government and local municipalities. That's where zoning and land use ordinances should be dealt with. State government under a Wright Bishop administration will never have a heavy hand, will always be supportive of local government. But there are a couple things we can do, and I can do as governor, using the bully pulpit on affordable housing. First of all, there's a not in my backyard mentality with affordable housing that we have to overcome. It's a stigma, it's inaccurate, and it's holding us back from solving the affordable housing crisis. And number two is we need to be more creative with land use ordinances and local zoning. And I, as governor, will never force or require local municipalities to do this, but there are all kinds of things that we can do. And I shared one in the debate that I will share with you. We've built big box retailers, and we've built massive parking lots. And in a post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic economy and an Amazon economy, we're frequenting those big box stores less than we ever have. What about looking at those big parking lots and asking ourselves the question, would it make sense to approach the owners of that land and say, that's on main arteries, that's where people work, it could be good economic development. Can we build some higher density condominiums or apartments in those areas so that we can have affordable housing in our communities? Those are the kind of specific ideas that I want to explore with local municipalities, always partnering with them and respecting their decisions.
And taking what you just said there and running with it just a little bit, because you talked about local zoning, tell me, give me your thoughts about Olympia Hills and what that might mean to the west side of the valley.
Well, it's a perfect example of how those decisions need to be made locally. In my opinion, it'd be really easy for state government to get into all these local challenges, but Olympia Hills has a lot to do with how we're going to deal with growth in this state. Where are the water resources going to come from? How is the transportation infrastructure going to be put in? What are we going to do with the congestion? How are we going to move people east and west in Salt Lake County? How are we going to move people north and south from Salt Lake County to Utah County and to Davis County? How are we going to handle all the traffic coming in from Tooele County from the west? 70% of their population works on the Wasatch Front. So Olympia Hills is all about how are we going to deal with the growth in this state? And we need to bear down with local leaders and have specific strategic plans on how we want to grow, so we don't fall into the trap that we've seen in so many other urban areas where they allowed urban sprawl because they didn't have a big strategic plan at the beginning. Salt Lake's grown a lot. Salt Lake County's grown a lot. Utah's grown a lot, but it's never too late to have a great strategic plan. And by having that, you can have transparency with citizens, and that you can bring them along by having them give their input along the way. And that should always be done at a local level. But we've got to tackle our water challenges, our transportation challenges, our clean air challenges, our affordable housing challenges. Those are all things that need to be in a strategic plan. And it's one thing for a candidate to have the vision and say the right things, but again, it's about having a strategy and having the experience to make it happen. I've done this in my business, created strategic plans. I know how to implement them with teams by collaborating with big groups of people, and that's what I want to do as governor.
So in a Thomas Wright strategic plan for transit, get me from Harriman to the University of Utah.
Well, you got to look at all things. It's a great, very specific question. One, we have to look at light rail. We have to look at tracks. We have to look at bus rapid transit. We have to look at expanding our roads and transportation infrastructure. We can't deny that we need to make sure that we're building the right roads. And then we need to inspire people to utilize those things to improve our quality of life. There is a way to get from Harriman to the University of Utah by expanding tracks, for example. We don't need to be in our cars all the time, but it's going to take a cultural shift, and it's going to take investing in our infrastructure. And I do think state government has a role to play with local municipalities and county leaders in saying, how are we going to expand our transportation infrastructure so that someone can get from Harriman to the University of Utah and do it in an efficient way that minimizes transportation impact and the impacts on our environment that we know we deal with in Utah, especially in Salt Lake County.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I will ask you the same way to close, if you don't mind. I want you to tell me why you selected Rob Bishop as a running mate, and then a closing comment from you, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Wright.
Well, I chose Congressman Bishop for very specific reasons. I was the first person that chose a running mate, and I chose my running mate not based on a strategy to win, because I didn't think that was the right thing to do. I chose my running mate early so people would know what a right administration would look like. And I chose him because of his ability to govern. He has a track record. He has a lot of experience. And I love that he resigned from Congress on his own accord and didn't have to be voted out and didn't stay too long. He went and served. He maximized his seniority in Congress. And then he voluntarily said, I'm not going to run. And then I approached him to be my lieutenant governor. I think he was ready to retire. So I chose him for specific reasons. Number one, he was a public school teacher for 28 years. He understands public education. We need to solve our teacher shortage challenges. We need to pay our teachers more. And we need to get government out of the classroom. Nobody understands that in this race more than somebody who's been a teacher for 28 years. Two, he understands rural Utah, and that allows me to help the urban areas and the rural areas by having a broad look at Utah. I want to be a governor of all people. He understands that component. Three, he really understands the Utah legislative process. He was the Speaker of the Utah House. So we can collaborate in a maximum efficient way with legislative leadership to have big strategic plans to get things done for Utah. The Wright Bishop administration can make it happen on day one because of Rob Bishop's experience and because of the ideas that we collectively bring to the table. So he was the perfect running mate. The Wright Bishop administration is the dream team in this race.
Thomas Wright, we certainly appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Our fourth candidate today, you will recognize the name, John Huntsman Jr. John is a former governor of the state of Utah, a former ambassador to China and to Russia, and the first gubernatorial candidate to be tested positive for the coronavirus. How are you feeling this morning, John? Wait, John just stood up. I saw him just leave where he was sitting. Now he's back, sitting down. There you go. Can you hear us and see us okay, John? Okay, we can see you, but we can't hear you yet. They're working on it. I can see them working on it.
Can you hear me?
We can now. We can now.
Thank you, Doug.
First question of the day, John. How you feeling?
You know, I feel rejuvenated. First of all, great thanks to our public health officials who work really tirelessly on cases like mine. And I'm mindful of those who are with families under one roof, those who get a little anxiety and concern over something that, listen, they're going to get through. Just abide by all of the practices that are being talked about out there, and everyone will be great. But thanks for asking, Doug.
Well, you bet. And in full disclosure, I worked at Huntsman Corporation for 4 years, and so John and I got to know each other, 25 years ago or so. So best wishes to you, and as you have this health concern in your family. A couple of business questions, because we need to ask those today. John, Utah's business environment, as you know, because you led the state through some highly successful episodes as well, it's been very good over the last 10 to 15 years or so. But the perception at times is that not all businesses, especially minority-owned businesses, get to participate financially in that success. What do we need to do to make Utah an all-inclusive business environment successful to any small business owner who wants to go there?
Well, the best thing we can do, Doug, is to get everybody a fair shot. And the only way that you give everybody a fair shot is to make sure that you've got a competitive environment that invites all good ideas, regardless of where they come from. And when we put down our 10-point plan over a decade ago, we were mindful of this when we reformed our taxes and got the most competitive tax code the state has ever seen. It's the same thing today as it was when we changed it 10 years ago. We delivered the first flat tax in the United States. Things like rebranding our state life elevated, things like creating the office that I did called GOED, Governor's Office of Economic Development. All of these things, I think, bring more in the way of information and data points that entrepreneurs could look at when they take that huge risk, take out a loan, gamble their best ideas in the marketplace. I don't care who they are, what their background is, what their point of origin is originally. Everyone should live in an environment that gives capital and ideas and entrepreneurship a fair shot. And none of that gets a fair shot if your taxes are high and if you've got regulatory burdens like we probably have way too many of now in the state. So I think in specific answer to your question, I would love to see the next governor identify the top 50 barriers to business startup and success. Because I don't think we've taken a look at this probably in 10 years, but I think it's the most important thing we can do because I hear about it all over the state. What are the barriers, the basic barriers that hinder small businesses from taking flight and getting off the ground? And that's something that I very much want to do.
Over the last couple of weeks, we couldn't have missed it because of all of the unrest across our nation and also here in Utah, even as late as this morning, with the death of George Floyd. How do you think Utah handled all of that and the rioting here, and then ultimately this growing movement now to defund police departments?
Well, I'm proud to have the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police. I've been close to law enforcement, either local or at the state level, for a lot of years, and I have great respect for what they do. Clearly, when people take to the streets, Doug, it's a symbol that things are going wrong and that there's terrible frustration. And my concern is that in our society generally, we're in the habit of talking past one another and not reasoning with one another. So this is a conversation I had, with some of my friends who were in the ethnic affairs community. And I don't think we've done an adequate job in bringing people together and listening. We've been given two ears and one mouth, and sometimes we don't use them in that ratio. We tend to talk past one another. And I think a governor is in a perfect position to bring community groups together, leaders in our ethnic communities, to listen. Law enforcement should be included in those conversations. So there are concerns all the way around, and I think we need to take what's happening in our streets, take it seriously, and register those concerns. And as we always do in the United States, and specifically here in Utah, we identify areas that we can work on together, we can problem solve around, and we then move the dialogue and momentum in that direction.
Any momentum at all, John, about defunding the police departments around our nation?
I don't know what you have if you defund police. Law enforcement play a critical role, and as has been pointed out before, you've got bad players in any organization. I think law enforcement would be the first to say that they too have bad apples too. But let's not dismiss the very important role that they play and traditionally have played in keeping our community safe. And let's not forget the enormous stress that they are under when we send them out, long hours, first responders to mental health crises, things that maybe they haven't been trained to do, oftentimes doing it without the proper funding and support. So I think before we start looking at defunding law enforcement, we ought to say, okay, do they have the adequate training and resources and the ability to engage in meaningful dialogue with all members of our community, particularly with those who have some serious concerns about the way they've perhaps been treated. All of this needs to be looked at and worked on.
You were an incredibly popular governor here in the state of Utah. I think approval ratings were somewhere in the 80% at the time. You had an opportunity to be ambassador to China. You took it. Why would the voters in Utah give you another opportunity to be governor here?
Well, I may have carried a little popularity, but I think they like my wife. She's a pretty remarkable person. Greatest human being I've ever met. That's probably not because of me. I answered a call to duty, and some people will recognize that, salute you for it, and some people will never forgive you for it. And I would not change a thing. It's the way I was trained. I've got two sons who are serving active duty Navy. They're trained to salute and do as told. And that's the culture that I was raised with in my family. And you can go back and say, maybe you do it differently, but Mike Leavitt, governor before me, he served as president. Governor Dern, well before me, went to serve as Secretary of War. This happens from time to time. And when you're asked to serve in the most sensitive foreign policy post anywhere in the world, it's something that I saluted and did my best to stand up and help my country. It's a very legitimate question, and I appreciate it when people ask, because our federal service is done. We are worn out. You serve in Moscow and Beijing, places like that, and these are the most difficult foreign policy posts there are. You do your best for your country, but the most important work we can do at this phase in our lives is right here in our own state, where I think in a state like Utah, the most incredible state in America, we have an opportunity to create models of excellence around economic development and transportation and clean air and public lands that maybe can be a symbol or a sign of hope for others who are really struggling. A lot of states can't do what we can do here. So I think we can make remarkable contributions here at the local level that will be really, really important, not just for our own citizens, but for maybe those who might be interested from outside.
The Salt Lake Valley is largely developed, with the exception of some areas on the west side of the valley, and the population projections are crazy over the next 20 years. What plans would you support for west side cities of Salt Lake County in constructing new or upgraded infrastructure, given the availability of land and interest to develop that land?
Well, you're talking about, and the chambers represent probably the fastest growing part of our state. And, you look at the developable land that's left in tens of thousands of acres, not many at all, that are the only acreage left in the whole Salt Lake Valley for development. And I've sat down with my good friend, Mayor Trent Staggs of Riverton. We've had some really good conversations about what he has learned, the issues that he's hearing about, the coordination or lack of coordination with the state on the things that matter most. And when we get to this level of population growth and we still have no east-west corridor built, I mean, this should have been done a long, long time ago. This is just sort of a representation of where the system has not worked in terms of putting down our money on things that are really, really important to the mobility of people. So now you've got to play catch up, and that's going to be more expensive and time consuming and disruptive. What I learned when I was governor, and what I learned many years ago when I was chair of a group called Envision Utah back in the 90s, when we were first looking at growth and choices that we have, is we have the tools to deal with growth. And the growth that we're looking at, Doug, over the next decade or two or three, when our state doubles its our population, I think it's going to be a lot higher, because the influx of people post-COVID-19, I think, will be a result of states and cities that are failing and people wanting to find a safe haven somewhere else. So I think our numbers are going to be way higher than we think. So let's begin to factor that in 10 and 20 years out, and begin to look at what the critical infrastructure projects are. And that has to include water, because no growth will be successful in the second driest state in America without water. And I think we tend to forget that. We don't put that at the front of our discussions like we should. We talk housing and transportation and other things, but we should start every conversation around growth with water, because if we can't successfully address that, we're not going to succeed and thrive as a civilization. So all of this can be done, but you know what? Just like any other endeavor in life, a governor, a leader of the state, must convene mayors and local stakeholders, listen, look into the future, and identify the adequate tools and funding that we've got to deal with our priority projects.
And you're talking about water and transit. You've mentioned a lot of the things that obviously we're interested in for the west side of the valley. And I asked earlier another candidate about Olympia Hills and that development specifically. What are your feelings about that type of expansion on the west side of Salt Lake County?
Well, anytime you have expansion into areas that might be somewhat controversial, it's really important for the people to be able to speak out and make those decisions. But you know what, as we develop, and another thing that I learned as governor, in a state that's growing as fast as ours, we really have to be mindful of the legacy that we're leaving behind. So as we grow and we look at housing and transportation and all of the hardline projects that we're considering and must do, we're also leaving a legacy of open space and quality communities and quality of life for the next generation. So every one of our decisions we make, we need to think not only about ourselves, but I think we need to think of the next generation 2 and 3, because this is a legacy called humanity that we're leaving behind. And as we go to develop and we look at new parcels and this gangbuster growth, we really do need to be mindful that there are others coming along, and they will either appreciate or not the choices that we're making today.
We're looking at China, a lot of talk about China these days, and maybe people sit back and say, that doesn't concern me. But things that happened in China do impact things that happen on the west side of this county, do they not?
Well, we're looking at the pandemic basically started in China. Nobody had heard of this just a few short months ago, and now it's sweeping us and affecting us from a health standpoint. And our two just in the world, and they're intertwined like never before. China will be our largest trading partner as far as the eye can see, and it will also be our largest trading nemesis. That'll be the challenge going forward, is how you juggle another superpower in the world that is on one hand going to be sometimes a collaborating partner with a few opportunities every now and again, and on the other hand is going to be an antagonist and someone who's going to be antithetical to everything that you do. So it's a challenge.
You chose Michelle Kafusi as your running mate. Why?
She's the most inspiring in a very long time. You know, it's not often, Doug, that you meet people who are not just elected officials, but they're path-breaking elected officials. She's the first woman mayor in Provo, the third largest city in the state. She runs police, fire, administrative, social services. I mean, she does an incredible job. But her story is what struck me as being so unique. Not only she's a charismatic, brilliant human being with a great family, but when she talks about coming from a family with a single mom, a broken household, and the fundamental lack of opportunity, and how she grew up by the bootstraps, took every opportunity there was, and against all odds, won an election here, won an election there, And after getting to know her and hearing her story, I thought, this is just incredible. I mean, not only is she an elected official with a lot of great experience, somebody you've won as a lieutenant governor, but when she speaks, she can appeal to people who generally would not tune into politics. And a lot of people are totally turned off by politics these days. She's got the kind of voice and the kind of narrative and biography where most people who don't follow politics would tune in and they would be inspired by her. And I think that's one of the great aspects of politics, is it still can inspire a whole generation if the right kinds of people get involved.
We have about a minute and a half left. John, if you'd like to offer a closing statement, please do.
Doug, you're terrific. It's so nice to see you again. The most important thing we can do, we'll have a vaccine, in the months ahead, and COVID will be history. But what won't be history is the economic hole that we find ourselves in. And when people look at me, I want them to know that I will be focusing laser-like on doubling the state's economy. We have a plan. Go check it out. We have an opportunity in this confusion and state of chaos in the world to bring opportunity home. Because whenever there's confusion, chaos, and uncertainty, capital and manufacturing will flee to a safe haven. And as governor, I want this to be a safe haven, just as I did as governor before. Beyond economics, mental health and mental illness is something that I will continue to talk about, because we are too good of a state and too good of people to let these alarming statistics on suicide define who we are. So that's another area. Those are the two areas, economics and mental health, that I'm going to be absolutely fixated by. And I appreciate people giving us every consideration. I've never felt better prepared to lead out, given the network of relationships, the experiences I've had in life, and picking up where I left off as governor. We did some remarkable things in creating historic growth in the state. We can do it again.
John, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and all the best and a speedy recovery, my friend.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you. Thanks especially to our Westside Chambers of Commerce for caring enough to sponsor this event. We have primaries coming up on June 30th. Obviously, some ballots in the mail right now. We thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you all a very pleasant good day.